Ahoy everyone, I am Nazir North and today we're going to try and turn Wales, my home country, into a fantasy map for Dungeons & Dragons or any other tabletop role-playing game that you might be playing. In real life, Wales is absolutely the OG fantasy land. For starters, the Welsh flag's got a dragon on it. Wales has its own ancient language. The Welsh language stems from the pre-Roman Brittonic language, the native language of the people of the British Isles way back in the Iron Age. Welsh predates modern English by at least 1,000 years and is still spoken today. Wales is also an integral part of the history of fantasy literature. For example, Tolkien's Sindarin language, which is the language the elves speak in the movies, is primarily based on Welsh. Also, Wales has a lot of castles, like so many castles. You can't move for castles. I literally pass 3 or 4 on the drive to work. There are over 600 castles in Wales total, which means it has the highest concentration of castles per square mile of any other European country. So yeah, Wales just seems like the naturally perfect fit for a fantasy campaign. Or maybe I'm just biased because I'm Welsh, who knows. Anyway, to start off the project, I'm going to use a 7:9 ratio for the map. So to get a good definition, I'm going with a resolution of 2048 by 2633. So let's use those settings in Wonderdraft to create a new project. Oh, and I almost forgot to introduce this guy. I finally got my own avatar. I commissioned a professional artist who was paid generously to draw this guy up. So you'll see him popping up more and more in some videos going forward. Rather than tracing out Wales by hand, I found a simple vector map of the UK, cut out Wales, and I'm importing that into Wonderdraft to get our coastal outline. It's come in reversed, so we'll just invert that, and there we go. A good canvas to start work on. I'm going to draw in the Welsh border first. I'm actually going to extend Wales's border a little, curving into the Severn River there at the bottom and stealing a bit of English territory. Sorry, Gloucester, you're in Wales now. In terms of physical geography, Wales is very hilly with a few mountain ranges that we need to cover. The notable ones here, which we'll need to map out, are the Clwydian Range, the Brecon Beacons, and the Eryri, also known as Snowdonia by its English name. Snowdonia houses the peak of Mount Snowdon, or Urwyddfa in Welsh, which is the tallest mountain in the British Isles, not counting the Scottish Highlands. The Highlands have a whopping 42 peaks, which are taller than Mount Snowdon. Perhaps we'll come back to do a map of Scotland in the future. Of these mountain peaks, the highest peak at Brecon is actually the only one that I've visited myself. It's called Caernafon. It's about a 4-mile walk to the top and the views are just incredible. I'm using 3 different assets in Wonderdraft here for the elevation: the large penned mountains, the medium penned mountains, and shortly I'll be using the penned hills as well. Once the major mountain ranges are roughly in the right place, I'm going to eyeball the rest of the mountains, exaggerating the elevation to a certain extent, as this is fantasy after all, and we don't want it to too closely resemble the real world country. We want to make something that's a little bit different. Next, we'll extend out the foothills to create the valleys which make up the main body of the Welsh countryside. Because we are doing this for fantasy, I'm going to take some liberties with the lake and river placement, just putting in some of the major rivers and making up a few smaller ones that fit in with the mountains and the hills that we've laid down. Next, moving on to trees and vegetation. As with the water, for this I'm just going to place things down where I think they would logically go based on the geography that we've already set on the map. So, darker coniferous trees in the highlands, and then the lighter coloured oak-like trees in the lowlands, with some grasslands dotted around here and there as well. Compared to the mountains and hills, I'm going to scale the asset size for the vegetation down to about 50%. I still want them to be large because this isn't a super detailed map, but I don't want them to be so big that they overshadow the mountains. Wales has a rich history ranging from the ancient Brittonic and Celtic roots through to partial Roman conquest in the 1st century CE. Then, as the Romans abandoned Britain, the Welsh fought off numerous invasions from the Anglo-Saxons in the east. Wales continued to be an independent land for over 1,000 years before eventually falling to the Norman conquest and coming under English rule in the 13th century. All heirs to the British monarchy have held the title Prince of Wales as part of their official title ever since. The other side of the border, I'm not going to spend any time laying out the geography on the English side. I'm going to treat the border as a hard line for now. In terms of colouring, I think we'll go with a nice green and brown for the two main colours, with a little bit of white that we'll add later on for the mountain tops, leaving the non-Welsh landmass in their default colour. Just going to add in a little shading on the map edges as well, and making the blue of the rivers a little stronger to help them stand out, as in many places they are covered by the trees. Let's also add in a nice little border. This one's got a sort of Celtic design in it, so let's go with that one. On to settlements and labels, in my opinion the best part of this kind of world building exercise. Let's do the outer regions first. I'm going to name the off-map portion of England to the east Albion, after the ancient Greek name for Britain. Then I'm going to name southwest England Breton-Tyr, which is Breton after the ancient Britons, and Tyr, which is Cornish, another Celtic language, for land. The country of Wales itself I will of course call Cymru, which is Wales in Welsh. For the main group of settlements, we'll go with a mix of names from the Brittonic and Latin history of Wales, starting off in the south. Now, there was once a Roman fort at Caerleon called Isca by the Romans, and an Iron Age town come Roman town at Caerwent, known to the Romans as Venta Silurum. In Arthurian legend, Caerleon was one of the places where King Arthur held court, and in the name Venta Silurum, Silurum comes from the name of the tribes of ancient South Wales, a people that the Romans called the Silures. Now, if you've ever watched Doctor Who, a lot of which is filmed in South Wales, the Silurians, an alien race from that show, are based off the Silures, using the same word. Contrary to where both of these settlements are in real life, I'm actually going to place both of these on the coast for this fictional map. Before we move on, there are three more names I'd like to draw on from the tales of King Arthur. The first is Avalon, the mystical island where the sword Excalibur was forged. For this map, I've decided that Anglesey is in fact Avalon, because why not? Note that I'm also using a different text style for features and regions as opposed to those that I'm using for settlements. Now, the second I want to draw on is Camelot. Although it's almost certainly a fictional place, some argue that Caerleon, or Isca, is the site of Camelot. Although we've already used that, most people seem to place it somewhere in England. However, for this world building and map making exercise, I'm just going to steal Camelot and plonk that in Wales as well. In fact, I'm going to make Camelot our capital. The last one to borrow from Arthurian legend is Camlan, the site of the final battle where both Arthur and Mordred were slain. Again, this is usually placed in Cornwall, however, there is also a case for it to be placed in Wales, so that's exactly what I'm going to do here. Returning to South Wales and moving a little to the west, we have the modern day city of Swansea, which according to some has its roots in the Viking name of Swains A, so that's what I'll add in here for that settlement. Next, we are moving to Carmarthen, or Caerfyrddin in Welsh. Caer, as we've come across earlier, means fort or castle, and Fyrddin a mutation of Merlin, also known as Merlin. Yes, Carmarthen is literally called Merlin's Fort in Welsh. Like I said, Wales is genuinely a real-life fantasy country. And for the name that we're going to use for the map, I'm going to merge and mix and match a little bit. We're going to go with Caermerddin, as the two words together make it a little easier for you non-Welsh folks to pronounce. Hopefully. On the Gower Peninsula, some of the oldest human remains in Britain, dating back to over 33,000 years ago, were found in a cave near the beach. That cave is called Paviland Cave, so I'm going to make that into a settlement on the peninsula. The remains were originally named the Red Lady of Paviland, although when examined later it turned out to be a male skeleton. I actually went to see them in an exhibition in Cardiff Museum a few years ago. Very interesting stuff. Moving further west, one of the oldest references to the region of Pembrokeshire in ancient literature is from Ptolemy's Geography, where he refers to some people living in that region on the coast. So I'm going to add in a settlement over here called Ptolemy's Landing. Moving up to the long west coast of Wales, we're going to add in a settlement on the modern site of Cardigan. Cardigan is in the region of Ceredigion, which means Ceredig's land. The settlement that I'm going to place will also be on the mouth of a river. In Welsh, a river mouth is called Aber. So we'll go with Aber Ceredig, which becomes, accounting for Welsh mutation of the hard C sound, Abergaredig. Further up the coast we have Aberystwyth. a notable part of which is a place called Constitution Hill. Constitution Hill used to be a medieval quarry and today has a small railway that goes up to the top. We'll play around with some of the Welsh translation here again. So, hill in Welsh is bryn. You might already know that if you've watched Gavin and Stacey. And quarry in Welsh is chwarel. If you've visited Wales, you'll know that bryn is a very common at the start of a place name, so let's go with Bryn Chwarel. Further up the coast, moving into North Wales, we have the Llŷn Peninsula. That double L sound in Welsh is pronounced as in Llywelyn or Llangranog, which is made by putting the tongue to the top of your mouth and making a sound that's a little bit like an L, but also a little bit like a CL, as in clock or clean. It's a very common sound in the Welsh language, but difficult for non-Welsh speakers to say. Now, the Llŷn Peninsula was once ruled over by Owain Whitetooth. Given the peninsula looks a little bit like a tooth, I think that's a good starting point. And Whitetooth in Welsh is Ddant Gwyn. So let's go with that. Ddant meaning tooth and Gwyn meaning white. Another quick Welsh lesson, the double D sound is pronounced th, as in Davydd or the, pronounced by putting the tongue just behind your upper incisors. It's a bit like the TH sound in English, although it has a bit of a buzz to it, a little bit like the difference between an S and a Z. Now that we are well into North Wales, let's take a look at Anglesey. Anglesey, if you're not familiar, is an island separated from mainland Wales by the Menai Strait, which in modern times has a bridge across it, but that's not always been there. Anglesey also features the village of Llanffair, which supposedly is one of the longest place names in the world. I'm not going to try and pronounce the full thing, but here it is. Anglesey, the name, is thought to come from the Old Norse Anglesey, meaning either Hook Island or Ongleys Island, although there isn't an historical record of Ongley, so there's a bit of a mystery there. Locals call it Ynys Mon, which is a link back to its Latin Roman name. During the Roman conquest of Wales, the story goes that there were a group of druids holding out in Anglesey, resisting the Roman invasion. The Roman general Gaius supposedly used German auxiliary troops from the Batavi tribe, who were excellent swimmers, to swim across the Menai Strait under the cover of night to take the islanders by surprise. Gaius then, however, heard news about the Boudiccan revolt further east and had to retreat. There's a lot of very interesting history around Anglesey. So, in terms of names, we have a lot of options here. I'd like to keep the druidic element. Druid in Welsh is Derwydd. I'd also like to incorporate a little bit of the Old Norse name, so let's combine that with Ongley. Ongley and Derwydd go together to make Ongley Dderwydd, with the first hard D also mutating into a double D with that Welsh sound. Another interesting place name in this neck of the woods is Bethesda. The first thing that might come to mind when you think about Bethesda is the game publisher, but the name actually comes from Aramaic, meaning either House of Grace or House of Mercy. The original Bethesda is in Jerusalem and is mentioned in the New Testament, but there are two Bethesdas in Wales, one here and one in southwest Wales, and there are another 15 Bethesdas in the US, along with a few more elsewhere in the world. It's clearly a very popular name. Now, for this map, I quite like the House of Mercy angle, so translating that into Welsh, we get T, meaning home or house, and then Tregareth, meaning mercy. So we have T Tregareth. Moving over to the east, we have Llyn Brenig, a reservoir which, when it was being built back in the 1970s, the workers uncovered a Mesolithic Bronze Age camp. The reservoir is on the Denby Moors, so I'm going to call the settlement Llyn Brenig Moor. Another archaeological excavation from the 70s at the Bont Newydd Paleolithic site near St Asaph discovered Neanderthal remains. One of only 3 sites in Britain where Neanderthal remains have been found. The remains found here are thought to be over 230,000 years old. And you thought the Roman conquest was a long time ago. Now, the word Neanderthal comes from the German Neander Valley, where the remains were first discovered, with Thal meaning valley in German. The site itself that we're looking at here is near the River Elwy, so I'm going to mash that with the German to get Thalelwy. Given Wales's history of mining and industry, I think it's only fair we give a nod to that as well. An important product of Welsh mining towns was coal. Handling coal will of course leave your hands black, which would be the in Welsh, with llaw meaning hands. So let's go with llaw the for a settlement name. Let's place it up here in this valley. We have barely scratched the surface on Welsh history and mythology to name some of these places, but I'm going to leave it there for now before the map gets too crowded, although there are loads more things that we could add in. If you've got a good idea for a name that you think I've missed out, let me know in the comments. For the final naming exercise, let's move on to the mountain ranges. Now, I already love the name Brecon Beacons. Although it is an English name, it has a great fantasy feeling to it. All it reminds me of is the lighting of the beacons from the Lord of the Rings. The Welsh name for the Brecon Beacons is Banau Brycheiniog. I'm going to merge the two into the Beacons of Brychan. Brychan being a 5th century Welsh king. We also get to retain alliteration in that name, which is great. I'm always a big fan of alliteration. That middle mountain range we've created, which I've exaggerated quite a lot for the purposes of this map compared to the real life map of Wales, I'm going to call Pen Ddraig. Pen meaning end or top, and Ddraig of course meaning dragon, mutated again from that hard D to a softer double D th sound. The mountains effectively become Dragon Top or Dragon Peak in English. In the north, Snowdonia is also an already great name, but I'd also like to call on Ddraig once again, as if an ancient white dragon is going to make their lair anywhere in Wales, it would definitely be here. So, I'm just going to push Ddraig for dragon and Gwyn for white together, using that synergy of the G and ignoring grammatical rules for the moment to get Ddraig Gwyn. Then I'm going to take the Welsh for old, which is hen, and the Welsh for big or heavy, which is mawr. I also want to throw the Welsh for home in there as well, which is catref. Altogether, I've got catref or Ddraig Gwyn hen mawr, which, in a messy kind of way, basically means the home of the big old white dragon. Names done, let's just put in the finishing touches for the map. For the scale, Wales is approximately 140 miles from top to bottom, and I know it's about 50 miles from Swansea to the mouth of the River Severn. Scale calibrated, let's also add in a windrose and a compass. I did a small colour adjustment on the settlement icons off screen as they were a little dark against the backdrop when I tried a test export, but now we are all done. What would Wales look like as a fantasy campaign setting? Well, there it is. My interpretation at least. How would you do it? There is so much more in Welsh history, mythology and folklore that we could draw on. There is just so much creative possibility here. I've been Nazir North. I really hope you've enjoyed this one. I certainly did. As always, I'll post the final map to Nazir North on Reddit, and I'll share the high-res versions via my Google Drive folder. Check the description below for all the links. If you've made it to the end of the video, please consider hitting that like button, and if you want to stay up to date with my other projects, then make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. Cheers guys, I will see you next time.